friends, I hope you're doing really well and welcome back to another video. As you can tell from the title, today's video is going to be all about different spring books and movies and shows that I think are perfect for this time of year. This video is going up a little bit later than I would have liked it to, so I hope you guys don't mind. I think this is my third video talking about spring book recommendations, so I thought that to change it up a little bit, I know that you guys always ask me for different seasonal shows and movies and animes, and so for this year I thought that I would include some shows and movies that I think are really wonderful for this time of year at the end of the videos. I tried to compile a list of books that I haven't mentioned before in the other two videos, so hopefully there are no repeats here, but I have 9 books to talk to you guys today. So for this video I've split the books up into different genres as per usual, and first up on the list we have classics. What I've noticed over the years is that I'm really drawn to classics 2 times in a year. The first is like the autumn winter season when it's getting really dark, because I want to get into the grittier classics then. But the second time is during spring, and I really love reading classics that are slightly lighter or classics that have a slice of life element to them. So first up we have a book that fits the second part of that description, and it's Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend. If you're looking for a modern classic set in Naples and explores themes of coming of age and girlhood and toxic friendship, then look no further. This story is a historical fiction set in 1950s Naples, Italy. It's actually part of a quartet, so this is book 1, and I'm really eager to read the books 2 to 4 as well. But it follows 2 unlikely friends, 2 young girls called Lila and Elena. They first meet when they're 10 years old, and the first book follows them through their adolescent years as they enter their young adulthood as well. They have a bit of an obsessive and toxic love-hate relationship with one another, so it's really intriguing as you're reading into it why they're friends or why they're drawn to each other. I found it very difficult to not be impacted by this book, and by the end of the story it kind of ended, I think it ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, but it made me want to pick up the next book. And it did take me, to be honest, a little bit of time to actually get into the story. I think I had to give this book 2 or 3 goes. So if you're struggling to get into this book because of the prologue and you're sort of wondering what's happening, then I really recommend sticking through with it because it will be so worth it. Life in Naples in the 1950s is described to be a very brutal, bitter and angry place, and there is widespread poverty, and yet it exuded so much life and vibrance. I was really enamored by the different characters and the way in which Elena Ferrante wrote. She just writes so fluidly, so clear, and I feel like she really captured childhood and specifically girlhood and the ways in which we can sometimes idolize different friends, especially when we're younger. Either way, I wanted to recommend it for spring, not because it's set in spring. I actually don't think it's really mentioned springtime at all in the novel, but more so because I always associate coming of age stories and watching these different characters grow over their early childhood to adolescent years. Yeah, I find it very appropriate and fitting for this time of year. So that was the first book. Next up, I have a book that is perfect if you're looking for a classic set in Florence, but then changes scenery halfway through to an English countryside. So I've recommended this book actually before for summer, but I feel like it's also perfect for spring because the Florence landscape, the part of the book that's set in Florence, is actually set in springtime, and you might have guessed it already, but that book is E.M. Forster's A Room with a View. In this book you follow a girl called Lucy, and Lucy is English but she's on a bit of a holiday to Florence, and she travels there with her cousin Charlotte, who according to all the Edwardian social standards is acting as a very strict chaperone. They stay at the Bertolini, where upon their arrival they are struck by the different eccentric characters they come across, including the unconventional Mr. Emerson and his son George. Lucy basically has the time of her life in Florence, and upon arriving back to England and to her fiancé Cecil, she finds herself being really torn by the lifestyle that she was having and leading in Italy versus the more strict and confined society that she finds herself back in England. I found this story and this book to be so gorgeously romantic, which is very fascinating to me because I didn't particularly love any of the characters. Yeah, I didn't find them to be especially likable, but for some reason I found myself being really drawn in and being swept away by this story. The budding romance and the character growth of Lucy, as well as the Florentine spring and English summer setting, I feel like that all added up to be a very romantic novel. It's also a very short one, so if you're looking for a short classic to enjoy, then I highly recommend A Room with a View. Okay, so now moving on to middle grade. Those of you who have been following me for a while will know how much I adore middle grade books and stories. I just love how hopeful they are. I love the found families, and they have the most vibrant cast of characters. I also think that middle grade fiction, especially when it comes to the fantasy genre, have some of the best world buildings in that genre. Anyways, one that I really wanted to recommend to you guys is The Age of Enchantment by Anna James. This is book 1 in the Chronicles of Weatherby series, but this book is perfect if you're looking to read about a magical school to do with seasonal magic. Everyone in Weatherby is born with a seasonal magic affiliation, so that can mean you're born with a bit of magic that is more associated with spring, summer, autumn or winter. However, a few selection of very rare people are born with the power to be able to wield all 4 seasonal magic, and these people are called the enchanters. Now there's also a trial that takes place where you sort of test which magic affiliation you have. So when a young girl called Juniper realizes and discovers that she actually is an enchanter, she has to end up leaving her family and go and head into the big city. She'll be able to study at the Thistledown Academy of Magic. You know, I think it's called the Thistledown Academy of Enchantment. The book is kind of split into 2 parts, and the first half is the one that really drew me in. You get to see Juniper and her family dynamics, and it's such a big and wonderful family, so evocative of the Weasleys. I loved their bookbindery business and how cozy and magical it all felt. Honestly, I do kind of wish that we stayed in the first half of the book a little bit longer, because by the second half you follow Juniper as she travels into the big capital city, and yeah, it kind of gets a little bit darker from that point. But overall, I had a blast reading about the different seasonal magics that people wielded, and it made me wonder what kind of seasonal magic that I would have were I to be born in Weatherby. I'd like to say that I would have some sort of autumnal affiliation, but I don't really know. I'd actually be really interested to know what kind of season you guys associate me with. Please let me know in the comments below. Anyways, this book is really perfect for this time of year because it actually starts on the first day of spring. Next up is one of my all-time favorite genres, and that is fantasy. And I have 2 fantasy novels I want to share with you guys, and the first is Watermoon by Samantha Soto Yambao. If you are a Studio Ghibli fan, then I'm sure you've already picked this one up or at least heard of it. It features magical worlds and jumping into puddles to transport yourself somewhere else, as well as folding yourself into origami. It actually starts in autumn, but for me personally, it really reminded me of like a wet, rainy spring day. I've actually shared before, I think here and definitely over on Instagram, that this book was a little bit of a disappointment for me, and the disappointment came from the lack of connection I felt to and with the characters, and I really didn't kind of buy into the romance element of this story. That being said, the reason why I've included this book is because I feel like sometimes you just really want the most atmospheric read, and certainly for me this had one of the most stunning and whimsical atmosphere. So I feel like if you're a Studio Ghibli fan, then it's worth reading just for that aspect alone. But the book starts in Tokyo and you follow a girl or a woman called Hannah. Now Hannah runs a pawn shop, but the shop is disguised as a cozy ramen restaurant, and on her first day at work she discovers not only that the shop has been ransacked, but her father is also missing and presumably kidnapped. The two of them travel to all sorts of weird and wonderful places in order to find her father before it's too late. I think the strongest element about this book is its magical world building. So if you're looking for a really whimsical story to fall into, something that's dreamy and conceptual and weird and wonderful, then I recommend Watermoon. Now if you're looking for a story that has fairies and a magical forest as well as elves and is set in Regency England and is a Cinderella story retelling, then I have the perfect book for you. That book is 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater. Unfortunately, the camera that I was using to film, which is my husband's iPhone, it just ran out of storage, so I've resorted to my phone. But I think I was in the middle of saying how much I loved Olivia Atwater. Her books never failed to put a smile on my face, and in this particular story you follow a housemaid called Effie who unfortunately falls in love with a gentleman, and because it's Regency England and there are social classes to uphold, a housemaid can't really love a gentleman. But one day she explores the forest nearby and she ends up encountering Lord Blackthorn, and he is a fairy who agrees to help Effie out if she in turn stitches 10,000 stitches onto his favourite jacket. Lord Blackthorn's manor is essentially an entire forest. All the rooms are out in the wild and the forest is covered with moss and draped with ivy. This luscious forest is basically at the heart of this book, and there are butterflies and gorgeous flowers everywhere. So I really feel like this is the perfect book to read in spring. It's such a whimsical and even soothing story. It's very charming. So if you've read any of Olivia Atwater's other novels, specifically Half a Soul, then please pick up 10,000 Stitches as well. And the next genre, which really is more of a subgenre or a niche, is healing fiction. Healing fiction is such a cozy and comforting subgenre on the whole, so I thought I would recommend two books to share with you guys. First up, we have Hot Chocolate on Thursday by Michiko Aoyama. This book is so wonderful if you're looking for a slow story that is set in a cafe and they talk about hot chocolate. It's a serial short story that centers around this tiny cafe in Tokyo called Marble Cafe, and it begins with a customer ordering her regular hot chocolate, but throughout the rest of the story you get to see the different characters and regulars who turn up to this cafe and you just follow their day-to-day lives. I loved how easy this book was to read, especially the first story where you follow the worker of the cafe. Writing was so smooth and I feel like we got to see like sweet little slices into different people's lives, and the way that the characters sort of brush by each other, sometimes knowingly and other times unknowingly, and a detail that I overlooked at first. It took me a few chapters to notice it actually, but something I really like about this book is that each chapter is based on a colour, and the following short story is somehow about that colour. So for instance, the first one is brown, and that's because the customer orders her regular hot chocolate. But reading this really just felt like having a really good cup of hot chocolate. It felt relaxing, it felt warming. It's definitely one of my new favourite healing fiction books. So yeah, that's Hot Chocolate on Thursday. But actually, I want to add as well that Matcha on Monday, which I believe is the sequel to Hot Chocolate on Thursday, is coming out very soon. So you can expect me picking that one up ASAP as well. You guys are not going to believe this. My phone apparently as well just ran out of storage. So thankfully I have another camera that I can rely on. I feel like I should have just started out with this one in the first place, but we are back and I think I was about to move on to the next book. Hopefully that's where I'm at. I have with me The Vanishing Cherry Blossom Bookshop by Takuya Asakura. If you would like a cozy healing fiction genre book that is specifically set in an antique bookshop and has cherry blossoms, as you can tell from the cover, as well as freshly brewed cups of coffee, then this book is the perfect book for you. Initially I was a little bit worried picking this one up because I thought that the gorgeous cover would somehow compromise the quality of the writing or the story, so I was really pleasantly surprised and just happy that this book actually held quite a bit of gravitas and weight. It's about a bookshop that can only be found during the fleeting cherry blossom season. The reason for this cover though is because the bookshop is nestled behind this huge cherry blossom tree that is quite unusual because the blossoms have like an ombre effect. The bookshop opens to customers only when the owner of the bookshop is reading the same book as the customer at the same time. The book takes place over 4 seasons and is actually quite heavy. There was a lot of talk about memory and grief and death, but being situated in neither death nor life, this bookshop sort of serves as an interim for people. I do think the book felt a little repetitive at times because there are certain phrases and sentences that are recycled constantly throughout the different chapters, but there is a definite beauty to reading this and picking it up during spring, so I did want to include it. I would have loved to be reading this in Tokyo under a weeping cherry blossom tree. I feel like that would have made it so immersive. And for the final genre, we've got non-fiction. I only have one last book to talk to you guys about, and this book is one that I have mentioned before and I've raved about it on my channel, but it's 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. This is a non-fiction memoir all about books and book lovers and the exchanging of letters. It gathers 20 years of letters and correspondence between Helene Hanff, who was a freelance writer living in New York, as well as a man called Frank, who is an English book dealer. Because the bookshop is in London and Helene lives in New York, the two of them never actually end up meeting over the 20 years of correspondence, and yet over their common interest of books, a really lovely and wholesome friendship ends up being built across the Atlantic. I found it really hilarious that after 2 or 3 letters, Helene writes to Frank as though he's like her best friend. She drops all sorts of formalities in her letters, whereas Frank is your typical British man. He's quite reserved and he's extremely professional. She is so classically American and he is so quintessentially British. It's an absolutely fun and really enjoyable read and dynamic to read about. Letters are so full of love and wit and humour. Helene Hanff, you can tell, is incredibly intelligent and yet eccentric at the same time. It's so heartwarming, and yet as you get further into the letters, you will understand why it's also heartbreaking at the same time. And yeah, I just fell in love with Helene and Frank and all the different bookshop employees. So if you're wanting to read about a book about books, then I really recommend 84 Charing Cross Road. Okay, now for the movies and TV shows. I do need to warn you that all of the things that I'm going to recommend right now, they are all animated. So I'm sorry if that's not what you are looking for, but I personally love watching animated movies and shows. And to be fair, I did want to recommend non-animated films as well, but I feel like I haven't watched enough just yet to be able to recommend a bunch that aren't really like your stereotypical movies. But to begin with, if you you are in the mood for a Studio Ghibli movie that is slightly underrated, or actually very underrated, I feel like, compared to their other films, and it also happens to be so perfect for spring, then I want to recommend The Tale of Princess Kaguya. It follows a farmer, and this farmer is out in the bamboo forest cutting bamboo trees, and when one day he finds a miniature girl inside one of the bamboo trees, he is convinced that this girl is a gift from the gods, and from that point onwards he is determined to raise her as well as he can. The first few moments of this girl's life are filled with running around in the village with the village boys and singing folk songs. She ends up stealing this really ripe and juicy melon from a farmer as well, but the farmer gets really concerned that she's been brought up way too unruly and influenced negatively by the village boys, so he ends up whisking her away into the city where she is going to be taught how to become a noble lady. So many Ghibli movies really feel perfect for spring, but this one in particular is really all about the transition from winter to spring, and you can see animated so beautifully with the budding of plum blossoms. If you've seen Hayao Miyazaki's watercolor paintings before he transitions into the final art you watch on screen, then you'll know how beautiful they are, and this movie is entirely in that art style, which is very unique for a Studio Ghibli film. It's a far looser approach in terms of the artwork, but the storytelling is absolutely gorgeous, and there's a very nostalgic and timeless classic feel about it. It's a perfect spring movie, so if you've been wanting to sort of explore the range of different films that Studio Ghibli has to offer, then The Tale of Princess Kaguya is so perfect. Now, if you're in the mood for a very cottagecore-esque series that takes place in this gorgeous forest, then I'm really excited to share Hakume and Bikuchi. This is an animated series inspired or based on the manga, and it follows two girls who are part of the small folk in this forest. They are polar opposites, but they live together, and they spend their days riding on beetles through the forest as their method of transport. There are talking animals and really yummy food. Essentially, they live in a tree together, and it's their day-to-day lives of what they get up to living in a forest. I believe I've mentioned in the past that I was actually pretty disappointed with the manga series. I just felt like it moved way too slowly for my taste, and I found myself getting quite distracted, but I decided to give this one a go in the animated format, and I'm so glad I did. It's definitely a new comfort series for me, and it's so perfect to just be playing in the background. It's so cottagey and whimsical, so I really recommend it if you want to watch something without feeling like your brain is being overstimulated. Next up is another anime inspired or based off the manga, and it's called Flying Witch. If you loved Kiki's Delivery Service and the way that it's kind of like slice of life moments in a village, and I feel like you'll really enjoy Flying Witch as well. But you follow a witch in training called Makoto, who is slightly clumsy, and at the start of this film she moves to rural Japan in order to practice being a witch. This is truly the perfect winter to spring transitional thing to be watching. Episode 1 features so many really beautiful shots of snow-capped mountains and the way in which it's melting as well. And by episode 4 there is this entire cherry blossom festival that takes place celebrating the coming of spring. Again, this one is really light and easy to put on in the background, that is very low in terms of stimulation, and so hopefully you'll be able to relax as you watch it. And then last but not least is another anime, and it's called The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity. I can never say that properly, but at the core of this story is a very much Romeo and Juliet retelling, except it's set in Japan, and you follow two characters, Rintaro and Kaoruko, but the two of them attend opposing schools that are very much rivals. Rintaro attends an all-male school that is sort of a school for delinquents, whereas Kaoruko on the other hand attends a very prestigious all-girls school that is very much known for being hardworking and getting really high grades. But the two of them end up bumping into each other at Rintaro's family bakery, and from that point onwards you see how the two of them overcome their school's prejudice in order to be together. I found myself really rooting for Rintaro-kun as the anime was developing, and I feel like it got more and more wholesome the further into the episodes I got. There was actually quite a bit of a depth to it that I wasn't expecting. There's also a lot of scenes involving cake because of course Rintaro's family owns a bakery, so yeah, I feel like it's a really lovely one if you just want a sweet and young romance story. But that concludes all of the different books and movies and shows that I feel like are really perfect for spring. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and thank you so much for being here. I'll also make sure to include links to my other spring recs videos in case you want some more books. I actually have a list on my phone of all the different spring movies that I haven't watched but want to watch in the future, so hopefully if I love them then I'll be able to feature them in next year's recommendation video for you guys. But thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all soon in the next cozy video. Bye friends!